The village of Ashgrove was small. Just 12 cottages, a chapel, and a crooked well in the center. It sat between quiet hills and thick woods, far from the cities, far from the noise. People here were proud. Proud of their fields, their traditions, and their silence. Ruth had lived here all her life. She was 24, with soft brown hair and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. She helped in the herb garden behind the chapel and taught the younger children how to read. She was kind. She was quiet. But that did not matter when things began to go wrong. It started with fever. First, little Martha fell ill, the baker's daughter. Then a boy named Eli, and then 2 more. They coughed through the nights, burning with heat, their eyes glazed. The healer did what she could. Ruth offered tea made from wild mint and willow bark, but the villagers turned their faces. They whispered. Then one child died, and everything changed. Ruth was the first name on their lips, not because they had proof, but because she lived alone, because she read too much, because she had once been seen talking to a fox instead of chasing it off. That was all it took. She brought something back from the woods, said one. She walks at night when no one watches, said another. Even the chapel's old priest looked away when she came to pray. Ruth stood in the center of the village square, her hands trembling. I did nothing, she said. I would never harm a child. No one met her eyes. Not even the mother she had once comforted. Not even the men she had helped in harvest time. A few people muttered prayers. Someone spit in the dust. Then the elder spoke. His voice was dry like the wind. You must go. She stared at him. Where will I go? He did not answer. Someone handed her a wool blanket, already frayed at the edges. Another dropped a small crust of bread at her feet. No bag, no shoes, no goodbye. When she did not move, someone shouted, Go before the sickness spreads again. And so she walked, 1 foot bare, then the other. Past the well, past the chapel, past the fields she had planted with her own hands, into the edge of the trees. She did not cry. Not yet. She held the blanket tight around her shoulders and walked until the shouts faded behind her. The forest stood tall and silent ahead, like a wall of shadows. She stepped into it. Behind her, no one followed. The forest was darker than Ruth remembered. The trees stood tall and close together, their branches heavy with leaves. Every step she took was slower than the last. Her feet were sore, her legs weak. The rough ground scratched her ankles. Thorns tugged at her skirt. Still, she kept walking. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stop. If she stopped, the pain would win. And if the pain won, the forest would swallow her completely. The sky above turned gray. The air smelled like wet earth. A low wind moved through the trees like a whisper. Then came the rain, soft at first, then harder. Cold drops fell on her face, her shoulders, her bare feet. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short bursts. She stumbled once, then again, and then she fell. Her knees hit the mud. Her arms shook as she tried to push herself up, but her strength was gone. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and dropped beside her, soaked and heavy. Her hair stuck to her face. She closed her eyes and whispered one last word. Please. The forest said nothing, but someone was listening. From between the trees, a figure moved, quiet as a shadow, bare feet, a rough cloak made of woven bark and fur, a satchel slung across one shoulder. He stopped when he saw her lying there in the rain. His name was Ewan. He had lived in the forest for many years. Some said he had no voice. Others believed he spoke only to the trees. No one in the village ever saw him, but they told stories about a quiet man who knew how to cure fever, who could speak with animals, who walked without sound. Ewan looked at Ruth. Her lips were pale. Her fingers clutched the mud. She was shaking, half-conscious. He bent down slowly, as if not to frighten her. She did not open her eyes. Her body had given up. He did not speak. He placed one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her head fell against his chest. She was burning with fever. Her skin was cold and wet. Ewan turned and walked deeper into the forest. The rain fell harder now, but he did not slow down. His path twisted between rocks and roots. He crossed a stream by stepping over smooth stones, never slipping. He moved like someone who belonged to the woods, part of it, not apart from it. After some time, he reached a small hut built into the side of a mossy hill. Smoke rose gently from its chimney. He pushed the door open with one foot and stepped inside. The room was warm. A fire burned low in the corner. Herbs hung from the ceiling. Shelves of dried roots and folded cloth lined the walls. Ewan laid Ruth down on a bed of thick furs. He covered her with a dry blanket and placed his hand on her forehead. Still no words. Only silence. But in that silence, Ruth was safe. When Ruth opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the ceiling, made of wood and branches, with small cracks that let in strips of gray morning light. It took her a moment to remember where she was. The forest, the rain, the fall. She tried to sit up, but her body ached everywhere. Her arms were weak, her head heavy. She was lying on something soft, furs layered over a bed of straw. A warm blanket covered her, smelling faintly of pine. She was not alone. Across the room, a man sat near the fire. He was stirring something in a small iron pot. He did not look at her, but Ruth knew he had heard her move. His hands worked slowly, steadily. Ruth's heart began to race. Her eyes darted around the hut. One door, no windows, herbs hanging in bunches from the ceiling, a shelf of clay jars and wooden bowls. No signs of danger, but fear still clung to her like damp cloth. The man stood. He was tall, with a thick coat made from animal skins. His dark hair was tied back. His face was lean, serious. He walked to her and set a wooden bowl beside the bed. Steam rose from it, something warm and thick with the smell of root and garlic. She looked up at him. He did not speak. Instead, he nodded once, then stepped back to the fire. Ruth reached for the bowl with shaking hands. Her fingers trembled as she brought it to her lips. The soup was bitter, but warm. It filled her belly, pushed the cold out her chest. She drank slowly, carefully, until the bowl was empty. She lowered it to the floor. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He gave no answer. Later, he brought her a cloth soaked in herbs and cleaned the cuts on her legs and hands. He used short, careful movements, gentle but never too close. Ruth watched him the whole time. She wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, but something in his quiet presence kept her silent. When he finished, he nodded again and returned to his place by the fire. That night, Ruth lay awake. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like slow breath. Inside the hut, it was still. She thought about running. She thought about the village, the faces that turned away, the hands that pushed her out. She thought about the cold and the forest and the way she would have died if he had not carried her here. Her eyes fell on him again. He had not tied her hands. He had not locked the door. He had said nothing, but he had fed her, warmed her, and treated her wounds. She turned her face into the blanket and closed her eyes. She was not ready to trust, but she was too broken to run. The days passed slowly. Ruth did not ask what day it was. She did not care. The sun rose, the fire was lit, and the quiet man moved about the hut with the same careful rhythm. His name, she had learned, was Ewan. She had heard it when he spoke softly to a crow that landed near the door one morning. "Go on. Ewan is busy," he had said with a faint smile. It was the first time she heard his voice. He did not speak much after that, but he always listened. He brought her berries in a carved wooden bowl. He set dry herbs near the fire for her to smell. He gave her soft leather shoes for her feet and never asked anything in return. Still, Ruth kept her distance. She answered only with nods. Her eyes stayed low. Her heart was not ready. Something inside her was still cracked, and she feared that if she let even one word fall, it would all shatter. But silence is weight, and one night it grew too heavy. The fire was low. A storm was whispering outside, brushing rain across the roof. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed, knees drawn close, blanket around her shoulders. Ewan sat on the floor by the fire, turning a dried root in his hand. She stared at the flames. "They said I was evil," she said suddenly. Her voice trembled. Ewan looked up. His face did not change, but his eyes softened. "They said I brought death, that I cursed their children." She swallowed hard. "I tried to help. I brought tea for their fevers. I watched over them while they slept. But when the child died, they looked at me like I was poison. Her shoulders shook. I am not evil, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I am not. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the crackle of fire. Then Ewan spoke, his voice quiet but firm. They do not know you. Ruth looked at him. No one ever asked who you are, he continued. Only what they feared. Tears ran down her face now. Slow, quiet tears that left warm trails on her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. Ewan did not move closer. He did not try to hold her. He only looked at her like she was not broken, like she was still human. I was afraid of you at first, she admitted. I know, he said, but I am not now. I know, he repeated. They sat in silence again, but it felt different this time. Not empty, but full. The kind of silence that lets two people breathe without hiding. It was not love. Not yet. But something had shifted. A thread had been tied. A wall had cracked open. And through it, the first small light of trust had begun to shine. The forest was beginning to turn. Leaves that once shone green now curled into red and gold. The air smelled of earth and would smoke. Ruth had started helping Ewan with small things, sorting herbs, hanging dry roots by the fire, brushing dust from jars. Her hands still trembled sometimes, but her heart no longer felt like it would break at every sound. Then came the smoke. It was a thin gray thread rising above the tree line, too far to be their own fire, too straight to be a forest burn. Ewan saw it first. He stood very still near the edge of the clearing, his eyes locked on the sky. Ruth stepped outside, brushing her hands on her dress. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer right away. His shoulders were tight. His gaze did not move. Then, softly, "They are here." Ruth's breath caught. "The villagers?" He nodded once. She felt her knees weaken. "Do they know I am alive? They are not here to ask." She did not speak. She did not need to. Her hands wrapped around her own arms. The fear came back like a cold wind, the kind that slips beneath skin and memory. Ewan turned toward her. "We must go." "Where?" "Somewhere they will not follow." He packed quickly, just roots, flint, water skins. Ruth wrapped herself in a fur cloak. Ewan handed her a pouch of dried berries. He led her out the back of the hut, down a hidden trail between the trees. They walked in silence. The forest grew thicker, darker. Ruth tried to keep pace, but her feet slipped often. Ewan never scolded. He would pause, hold out a hand, and wait until she caught up. He moved like he knew every stone, every shadow. Finally, they reached the falls. The water crashed down from a wall of black rock, loud and cold. Mist curled into the air. Behind it, nearly hidden, was a narrow opening in the stone, just wide enough for a person to pass through. Ewan stepped in first. Ruth followed, ducking low. Inside was a small cave. Dry. Safe. The ground was covered with moss and soft dirt. Ewan lit a small fire in a pocket of stone, careful to let no smoke escape. They stayed there for days. Outside, Ruth sometimes heard footsteps, voices. Once, even a dog barking far off. But the waterfall hid them, its sound louder than fear. Inside, Ewan said little. He offered her food, held out water, watched the entrance while she slept. One night, she whispered, "Thank you for not asking why they hate me." Ewan looked at her, calm and steady. "I do not need their story," he said. "I see you with my own eyes." Ruth felt something stir in her chest, a slow warmth, not from the fire, from being seen. The days in the cave were long, but they were quiet, safe. The sound of the waterfall outside never stopped. It became part of Ruth's world, like a drum that kept time when everything else stood still. Ewan rose early each morning. He would step out to check the forest trail, always careful, always silent. When he returned, he brought small things, mushrooms, wild roots, tree bark, sometimes even dried berries or a rabbit for soup. At first, Ruth just watched. She sat near the fire, knees drawn to her chest, her fingers tugging at the hem of her sleeve. Then one morning, without a word, Ewan placed a bundle of herbs in front of her. She looked up. He handed her a small stone knife and pointed to a bowl. She nodded. That was how it began. She cut slowly, carefully. He showed her how to grind leaves into paste, how to dry flower petals on flat stones near the flame, how to boil water with just 3 twigs, if the fire was right. She learned with her hands. He taught with his silence. They worked side by side. Ewan mixed roots. Ruth dried berries. When she got something wrong, he showed her how to fix it. When she did it right, he only nodded, but it was enough. One afternoon, while grinding mint leaves, Ruth sneezed. Ewan looked up, surprised. She laughed. The sound startled her. It had been so long. She covered her mouth, eyes wide. Ewan did not laugh, but his lips curved just a little, the first time she had seen anything like a smile. "You should laugh more," he said softly. Ruth looked down, then back at him. "I forgot how." That night, they sat near the fire, shoulder to shoulder. Not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth. Ruth asked, "Why do you live alone?" Ewan stared into the flame. "People speak too much. The forest listens." She nodded. She understood. The next day, he took her deeper into the woods. They walked slowly. Ewan showed her how to spot deer tracks in soft earth, how to listen for the snapping of branches, how to look for herbs hidden under moss. Ruth was quiet but alert. She felt awake again, not just alive but present. That evening, back in the cave, she placed a handful of wild thyme on a rock to dry. Ewan watched her. "You learn fast," he said. "No one ever taught me before," she replied. He handed her a bowl of warm soup. She took it with both hands, her fingers brushing his. She did not pull away. They did not speak again that night. But the silence between them was no longer filled with fear. It held something else. Trust. Small, steady growing. Like a new fire. One that did not burn but warmed. The sun was soft that morning. Light filtered through the trees like golden threads. The waterfall roared behind the rocks as always, steady and loud, but comforting now. Ruth felt calm. She carried a small wooden bucket and walked toward the stream a little farther down from their hiding place. The air smelled of wet leaves and pine. Her feet moved lightly across the mossy ground. She knelt near the water's edge, dipping the bucket slowly. That was when she heard it, a twig snapping. Too sharp, too close. Before she could turn, two strong hands grabbed her from behind. She screamed, but a cloth was pushed over her mouth. Another man grabbed her arms. Rough voices hissed in her ear. "Got her. Told you she was still alive." They pulled her up, dragging her away from the stream, through the trees, toward the edge of the forest. Her heart pounded in her chest. She kicked, twisted, tried to scream again, but no one came. Ewan was not there. She bit one of the men, hard, but he only laughed and shoved her forward. Her bucket fell to the ground, water spilling into the dirt. They tied her wrists. "She's to face judgment," one said. "The elder will decide." Their faces were familiar, men from the village. One had thrown stones at her the day she was cast out. The other had once begged her for fever tea and never said thank you. Now they dragged her through the woods like a thief. They did not notice the quiet behind them. They did not see the shadow that followed. Ewan had seen the spilled bucket. He had seen the marks in the mud. And now he followed, silent, focused, his eyes cold and steady. When the men stopped to rest, Ruth was tied to a tree. Her lips were cracked, her face dirty, but her eyes were sharp. That night, as the men dozed near a fire, Ewan moved. No sound, no light. He crept through the trees, a part of the darkness. He stepped behind the first man and gently removed the knife from his belt. He moved to the second and slipped the string of keys from his coat. And then he was beside Ruth. She gasped, but he raised a finger to his lips. She nodded, heart racing. He cut the rope from her wrists. She winced but did not speak. Together, they stepped back into the woods. The men never stirred. No fight, no anger, just the forest taking back what it never gave away. When they reached the safety of the cave, Ruth collapsed into his arms. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. Ewan looked at her, calm but fierce. "No," he said, "they lost you. I only found what they threw away." And in that quiet space, under the roar of the falls, Ruth understood. She was not alone anymore. The morning after her rescue, Ruth stood at the cave's edge and watched the sunlight fall across the forest floor. Birds chirped softly above. A squirrel darted across a low branch. But Ruth was not thinking about the trees or the water. She was thinking about the fear, and how tired she was of it. She turned to Ewan. He was crushing dried leaves into powder near the fire. I do not want to hide anymore, she said. He looked up quiet. I want to build something, she continued. A place of my own, not just a cave or a hut. A home. Ewan watched her for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod. I know a place, he said. They left the cave 2 days later, moving carefully through the forest. Ewan led her west, past old trails and sunlit glades, until they reached a forgotten place near a small stream. There stood the remains of a stone cottage, half covered in moss and vines. The walls were still strong. The roof was broken in places, but the bones of the house were there, waiting. This was a healer's home, Ewan said softly. Ruth stepped inside. Her fingers brushed the rough stone. She smiled. It will be mine now. They began at once. Ewan patched the roof with wood and bark. Ruth cleared the floor, sweeping out years of dust and broken leaves. She found an old iron kettle buried under rubble and cleaned it until it shone. Day by day, the cottage changed. Ruth planted herbs outside, mint, thyme, chamomile, and yarrow. She shaped little beds of earth with stones and filled them with soil. Ewan helped her build a small coop from fallen branches. Then he brought her 2 chickens, gifted by a traveler who owed him a favor. She fed them every morning with quiet joy. Inside, they hung dried roots from the ceiling. Ruth laid furs near the fire, stitched soft cloth for the table, and carved a small wooden shelf for her teas. She laughed more often now. Her eyes shone brighter. Ewan still spoke little, but he listened more. When she talked about her childhood, he nodded. When she cried over a memory, he stayed near. He never told her what to do. He simply helped her become who she already was. One evening, as the sky turned pink, Ruth sat on the step of their little house. She held a cup of warm root tea and looked out at the trees. I never thought I would feel safe again, she said. You made this, Ewan said beside her. You built peace with your own hands. She smiled. I used to dream of a place like this, she whispered. Now, she no longer had a dream. It was real, and she was not running anymore. The rains came without warning. Heavy, wild rains that fell for 3 days and nights. Rivers swelled. Roads turned to mud. The wind howled through the valley like a warning no one had heard in time. Ewan noticed it first. He stood at the edge of the stream, near the cottage, and watched the water rise. It moved faster than it ever had, brown and angry. They will not be ready, he said quietly. Who? Ruth asked. The village. Ruth froze. She had not spoken that word in weeks. Village. The place that cast her out, that called her cursed, that dragged her through the woods and tied her to a tree like a wild thing. But now they were in danger. Children, old people, families. She took a slow breath. I'm going, she said. Ewan did not argue. They packed quickly, healing herbs, clean cloth, jars of salve. Ewan carried his satchel. Ruth tied her cloak tight around her shoulders and filled a basket with dried tea leaves and boiled roots. The road to Ash Grove was soaked, but they pressed on. When they reached the edge of the village, Ruth saw chaos. The river had spilled over the banks. Water rushed through the fields, flooding chicken coops and soaking grain stores. People shouted, carrying buckets, trying to move animals and supplies. Near the chapel, a crowd gathered. A child was lying on the ground, pale, shaking, lips blue. Martha's boy, Ruth whispered. She remembered him. His name was Tom. He fell into the cold river, someone cried. He is not breathing right. Ruth stepped forward, but the voices around her shifted. Is that her? Why is she back? She brought this, I told you. Enough. Ruth's voice rang sharp and clear. People turned. The same villagers who once looked past her now looked at her directly. Some with fear, others with something else. Guilt, curiosity. She knelt beside the boy, ignoring their stares. She touched his forehead. Cold. His breaths were fast and shallow. He has water in his lungs, she said. I need space. No one moved. Ewan stepped beside her. Just one look was enough. The crowd stepped back. Ruth opened her basket. She crushed mint leaves, mixed them with a warm root paste, and placed it under the boy's nose. Then she rubbed his chest with a salve that smelled of pine and vinegar. Minutes passed. Then a cough. A sharp, rattling cough. The boy gasped. His mother dropped to her knees, sobbing. He's breathing. Ruth stood slowly. No one spoke. She looked around at them, at the faces that once turned from her. "You do not have to thank me," she said softly. "But you were wrong." No one argued, and for the first time, no one looked away. The wind was cold, but Ruth did not shiver. She walked slowly through the village square, her boots firm on the path, her back straight. Her long coat brushed against her legs. In her arms, wrapped in a wool blanket, slept a baby, warm, soft, breathing gently. And around her neck, fluttering in the wind, was a scarf. Red. She had dyed it herself using crushed berries and boiled bark. The color was deep and bold, the kind of red that dared to be seen. At her side walked Ewan, quiet as ever. A leather satchel hung from his shoulder, filled with small jars and dried herbs. He did not speak. He did not need to. The villagers watched from windows, from doorways, from the corners of their eyes. Some nodded, some turned away, and some stared, trying to understand. It had been 3 months since the flood. 3 months since Ruth saved a child with hands they once called cursed. No one had said sorry, but no one had tried to stop her from returning either. She had not come back to ask for anything. She came because she had no fear left to carry. They passed the chapel. Ruth glanced up at the bell tower, then looked down at the child in her arms. Her daughter, born on a quiet night beside a warm fire in the cottage she'd built herself. She smiled. They passed the well. A little boy waved. His mother pulled him close, but said nothing. Ewan paused to give dried roots to the old woman who once spat in Ruth's path. The woman took them with shaking hands. No words passed, but her eyes looked down ashamed. Ruth said nothing. Not every heart changes. But Ruth no longer needed them to. Her life was no longer shaped by what they thought of her. It was shaped by soil, by laughter, by soft baby hands and herbs growing in the sun. At the edge of the square, Ruth turned to look back one last time. She saw fear still, but she saw something else too. Curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, respect. She took Ewan's hand. They walked toward the trees, toward home. The red scarf danced in the wind behind her like a flame refusing to go out. Have you ever been cast out, misunderstood, or judged unfairly, but found the strength to build a new life anyway? Tell us your story in the comments below. Your voice might give someone else the courage to stand tall too. And if Ruth's journey moved you, like, comment, and share this video. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest strength.